You made an extra payment on your loan last month and it felt like progress. Like you were winning, like responsible future you was finally showing up. You watched the balance drop and something in your chest loosened, just slightly, and you thought, this is the right move. I know this is the right move. But you haven't checked what that same money would be worth in 10 years if you'd send it somewhere else. This is about that number. You've probably built your entire relationship with debt around one idea. Debt is bad. Paying it off is good. The faster you eliminate it, the better. And that idea came from somewhere real. Maybe you watched someone you love get buried under it. Maybe you carried your own version of that panic. The month where the minimums felt like they were winning, where the balance barely moved no matter what you threw at it. Debt has a texture that savings don't. It follows you. It sits in the background of decisions you think have nothing to do with it. And so the day you get ahead of it, the day you can actually see the end, you attack it. You pay extra, you celebrate the payoff date moving closer. You feel, maybe for the first time, like you're in control of something. And you're just controlling the wrong thing. Think about the last time you got a windfall, a bonus, a tax return. A month where everything lined up and you had an extra $500, maybe $800, maybe more. Where did it go? If it went to the debt, I already know how you made that decision. It wasn't a decision, really. It was a reflex. Extra money goes to the debt. That's the rule. You didn't run the numbers. You didn't compare the interest rate on the debt to what that money could earn elsewhere. You felt the weight of the balance and you threw money at it, and the relief was real and immediate, and it confirmed the rule all over again. That relief is costing you. Not all of it, not always. But for a specific category of debt, a category a lot of people are carrying right now, the aggressive payoff strategy has a hidden price that nobody ever shows you on the statement. The statement shows you the balance going down. It does not show you what you gave up to make it go down. And that gap, that invisible cost, is where this gets uncomfortable. Here's what the last 3 years of your debt payoff strategy might actually look like. Let's say you've been carrying a mortgage, a car loan, and a student loan. The mortgage is at 3.5%. The car is at 4.9%. The student loan is at 5.2%. You've been making extra payments on the student loan because you hate it the most. It's the one that feels most like a mistake, the one with the most emotional weight. So for 3 years, every extra dollar has gone there. You've paid it down significantly. Maybe you're close to done. And the whole time you've been doing that, the S&P 500 has averaged somewhere between 8 and 10% annually. Every dollar you sent to a 5.2% loan instead of a broad index fund cost you the difference. 3 to 5% annually, compounded on every extra dollar for 3 years. Do the math on $400 a month of extra payments. That's not a rounding error, that's a decision that had a price you were never shown. And this is where it gets interesting, because the personal finance industry, the books, the podcasts, the gurus with the debt snowball and the debt avalanche and the financial peace programs, they built their entire brand on the emotional satisfaction of debt elimination. And they're not wrong that it feels good. They're not wrong that for high-interest consumer debt, credit cards at 22%, store cards at 28%, the math clearly supports aggressive payoff. When the debt is more expensive than what your money can earn, you pay the debt. That's just arithmetic, but they blurred the line. They took the clear logic that applies to predatory rate debt and extended it, emotionally, to every debt. All debt became bad. Owing anything to anyone became a moral failure to be corrected as fast as possible. And in doing that, they disconnected you from the actual question, which is not is this debt good or bad, but what does this dollar do more good here or there? Nobody taught you to ask it that way. You were too busy trying to feel okay about the debt to run the math on the debt. The game changed and nobody told you. Here's what nobody tells you about money. The wealthy have debt not because they can't pay it off, because they ran the numbers and the numbers told them to keep it. The wealthy have mortgages on paid-for houses, not because they need the loan, because a 3% mortgage in a world where capital grows at 8 to 10% means the bank is essentially subsidizing their investment portfolio. The wealthy have business debt not because they're struggling, but because borrowed capital deployed at a higher return rate than the borrowing cost is literally how leverage works. They are not trying to eliminate debt. They are trying to use debt as a tool. And they learned, or someone taught them, to separate the emotional experience of owing money from the mathematical reality of whether the money should be somewhere else. That separation is the entire skill, and most people never develop it because the emotional experience is so loud it drowns the math out completely. Let's talk about Marcus. Marcus is 34, makes good money, has been aggressively paying down his mortgage for 7 years because his father told him owning his home free and clear was the definition of financial security. He's added about $1,100 extra per month to his mortgage payment since he bought the house. 7 years, roughly $92,000 in extra principal payments. His mortgage rate is 3.1%. His home's equity is substantial. He feels safe. He is safe. But that $92,000, invested at historical market returns over those 7 years, would be approximately $152,000 today. He paid $92,000 to save himself the ongoing interest on that principal, which at 3.1% is a very cheap cost of capital. He bought the feeling of ownership at the price of $60,000 in growth he'll never see. That's not catastrophic. Marcus is not broke. But Marcus made a $60,000 emotional decision disguised as a financial one, and he'll never know it because the statement only shows him what he gained, not what he traded. But there's something darker underneath this. Here's the first principle. The interest rate is the entire conversation, and most people skip it. The common belief is that debt should be eliminated as aggressively as possible. The faster you pay, the better. Every extra payment is a win. And this belief is so emotionally satisfying, so morally coherent. You borrowed it, you pay it back, you owe nothing to no one, that the math never gets a seat at the table. But the math is the table. The only question that matters when you have extra money and you have debt is this: is the interest rate on this debt higher or lower than the return I could reliably get by investing that money instead? If your debt costs you 6% and your investment returns 8%, you invest every time. If your debt costs you 22% and your investment returns 8%, you pay the debt every time. The line is not moral, it's mathematical. And every time you make that decision on instinct instead of calculation, you are potentially leaving money on the table because the debt felt worse than the alternative looked good. The identity shift this requires is going from I want to be debt-free to I want to be wealthy, and those are not the same destination. Debt-free is a feeling, wealthy is a number. You can be debt-free and poor, plenty of people are. You can have a mortgage and a car payment and be building more net worth per year than someone who paid everything off and then let the money sit in a checking account feeling relieved. The goal was never to own nothing, the goal was to have something. And sometimes owing something at a low rate is exactly how you build the something. And what happens next is the part most people miss. Here's the second principle. Paying off low-rate debt early is a guaranteed low-return investment in disguise. When you pay an extra dollar toward a 4% loan, you are effectively earning a 4% guaranteed return on that dollar. The debt is gone, you no longer pay interest on it. The math works out to the same as if you'd invested it at 4%. And 4% guaranteed sounds decent until you realize that a diversified equity portfolio has historically returned somewhere between 7 and 10% over any rolling 20-year period. Which means every dollar you paid toward 4% debt instead of investing cost you the 3 to 6% difference. Not once compounded, every year, for however long that dollar would have been invested. That's the invisible cost. It doesn't show up anywhere. Your debt statement shows the balance declining. Your investment account shows nothing because you never funded it. The opportunity cost lives in the account that doesn't exist. And here's where it compounds emotionally as well as mathematically. Because people who aggressively pay off low-rate debt often feel virtuously behind on investing. They hit their 40s with limited mortgage balances and modest investment portfolios and a specific kind of confusion. Why isn't the number bigger? I did everything right. I was disciplined. I got rid of the debt. And the answer is, you optimized for the feeling and not the outcome. The feeling was real, the discipline was real. The direction was wrong. This is where it gets interesting. There's a couple, let's call them Priya and James. They bought their first house at 29 with a 30-year mortgage at 3.7%. Their parents, both of whom grew up in contexts where debt meant danger, told them to pay it off fast. So they put every discretionary dollar toward the mortgage from day one. By 41, they owned the house outright, completely free and clear. And at 41, Priya and James had a paid-off house worth for $180,000 and an investment portfolio of $112,000. They felt incredible. The house was theirs, no bank, no payment, freedom. Their neighbors, Derek and Sue, bought the same model house the same year at the same rate. Derek and Sue made the minimum mortgage payment and invested every extra dollar in index funds instead. At 41, Derek and Sue still had $190,000 left on their mortgage. And their investment portfolio was $410,000. Same income, same neighborhood, same house. Different decision about where the extra money went every month for 12 years. The gap in net worth was over $200,000 in favor of the people who kept the debt. Nobody showed Priya and James that comparison. Nobody showed them what keeping the low-rate debt and investing the difference would have looked like. They were told debt is bad, paying it off is good, and the story ended there. Here's the third principle. Debt payoff sequencing is a strategy, not a moral hierarchy. The person who wins at this is not the most aggressive debt payer. It's the most strategic one. That person looks at every debt they carry, writes down the interest rate, and compares it to what their money could earn. High-rate debt, anything above roughly 6 or 7%, gets paid aggressively because the math supports it. Low-rate debt, anything below that line, gets paid minimally while every extra dollar goes to work building the portfolio instead. They are not trying to feel debt-free. They are trying to maximize net worth. And the sequencing, which debt gets attacked, which gets maintained, in what order and at what pace, is a deliberate, recalculated strategy, not a one-size response to the emotional experience of owing. This also means the debt snowball, the popular method of paying smallest balances first regardless of interest rate, is often the most expensive strategy mathematically. It's the most motivating. The quick wins feel good, the momentum is real. But motivation is not the same as optimization. The debt avalanche, highest rate first, saves more money. And the investor's approach, minimum payments on everything below your expected investment return, maximum investment everywhere else, builds the most long-term wealth. These are not equally valid choices. They produce meaningfully different outcomes over a decade. The identity shift is from I need to feel better about my debt to I need my money to produce the best possible outcome 20 years from now. That's a harder identity to inhabit. It requires sitting with the discomfort of the debt while simultaneously watching your investments grow. And that discomfort, owing money while also having money, is psychologically grating for a lot of people. The wealthy have learned to tolerate that tension. Most people haven't. Every person you envy made a choice you weren't willing to make. And for a lot of people, that choice is simply this. They kept cheap debt and put the money to work instead. They didn't celebrate paying off the 3% mortgage. They celebrated the portfolio hitting $500,000 while the mortgage was still there. They held the uncomfortable position long enough for the math to pay out, and it did. Project it forward. If you have a 4% student loan and you're making extra payments instead of investing, that gap between 4% and historical market returns compounded over the remaining life of your loan and then over the decades your investments would have grown after is not a small number. It's not the difference between good and great. Depending on your loan size and timeline, it could be the difference between retiring at 62 or 68, between having choices in your 50s or not, between your kids watching you stress about money or watching you be free of it. That's what's riding on the sequence of these decisions. Not today's payment, the trajectory of every payment, compounded. The math doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care that you felt better making the extra payment. It doesn't credit you for the discipline. It just runs the numbers and returns the number, and the number is what it is. Most people don't want to look at that. It's easier to feel good about the shrinking balance than to feel the complexity of a better strategy that requires you to live with the debt a little longer. Easier to follow the simple rule than to do the harder math. Easier to feel responsible than to be financially effective. But you already know that. You've known, somewhere underneath it, that the thing you've been doing with the extra money wasn't necessarily the best use. You just needed someone to say it plainly. Without judgment, just math. So here's where you are. Two paths, neither one is comfortable in the way you want it to be. The first path is continuation. Keep making the extra payments. Keep watching the balance fall. Keep that specific feeling of owing less, of being closer to free, of handling it. The anxiety is manageable on this path. The progress is visible. The cost is invisible, which makes it easier to not think about. In 10 years, you'll have less debt and probably less wealth than you could have had. You'll look okay. You'll be fine. The number just won't be what it could have been, and you won't be entirely sure why. The second path requires you to do something that feels counterintuitive and uncomfortable. Stop attacking cheap debt and start building something instead. Look at the rate on every debt you carry. Draw the line at your expected investment return. Make only minimum payments on anything below the line and redirect every extra dollar into the market. Sit with the discomfort of the loan balance not moving while the portfolio grows. Measure your progress by net worth, not by debt balance. And hold that position for long enough to see it work. That's not a feeling, that's a strategy. And strategy requires tolerating the discomfort that feelings would have you avoid. The question isn't whether you can do the math. You can. The question is whether you're willing to feel the discomfort of the better answer long enough to let it pay out.